Hello, everyone. Welcome to our wonderful webinar. It's called Zero Trust. What is zero trust? Zero trust, zero regret. I am Dr. Sharnita Rice. I have been in the healthcare industry for 18 years. I'm a nurse practitioner by trade. I used to work on computers back in the good old days of DOS when we was just pulling over the internet. Now I am the CEO of Reassured Workforce Solutions, where we bridge the gap between cybersecurity and healthcare. We help healthcare organizations with their cybersecurity posture by delivering or helping procure various roles to help them strengthen their cybersecurity posture, as well as help with the bedside, because our passions are patient safety, patient outcomes, and patient satisfaction. So we have our wonderful panel here, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. They're with Peak Solutions. So tell me about Peak Solutions and tell me about yourself, whoever would like to go first.
I think I shall. Hi, everybody. How are you? I'm Jay Corpy. I'm with Peak Solutions. I have a fairly extensive military career. I spent about 21 years, and Jeremy likes to remind me 15 days in the military. After that, I got the opportunity to go work and do some red teaming in Los Angeles. And then we've been doing our own thing for helping other companies. And that's us with Peak Solutions. So you might be asking yourself, what does Peak Solutions do? Well, Peak Solutions helps organizations bridge the gap between business and technology. We're delivering that tailored cybersecurity, DevSecOps, and overall business strategy services that are not only protecting organizations, but they're also positioning organizations for growth. Our team is going to be the team that blends deep technical expertise with business insights in order to solve those complex problems, reduce risk, and unlock multiple opportunities.
Perfect. Leah, you want to go?
Yeah, I'm Leah Dotson. I'm a co-founder of Peak Solutions, and I'm a GRC focused, so governance, risk, and compliance focused cybersecurity specialist. So my work centers on helping align security strategy with business goals and being that bridge between security and business.
Nice. My name is Jeremy. Also a founder here at Peak Solutions. I specialize in cybersecurity, AI innovations, and governance, DevSecOps, kind of a lot when it comes to technology. I have about 25 years in the industry. Started off at NSA doing nation state attacks, and then moved to organizations like Dell, HPE, and then went to the Department of Energy to do nation state attacks, but as a defense individual. So defending our nation by doing nation state type attacks to us. So I'm always thinking about how to get into organizations, and therefore how to advise them how to protect themselves. And so zero trust is near and dear to my heart because it has both made me successful as an attacker and as a defender.
So I understand. And thank you all for introducing yourself. For our attendees, thank you for being here. And if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will definitely get to them uh, at the end of of this webinar. So I know I've talked to various people, Jeremy, and you mentioned that you you was in the military with NSA. And from my understanding, that's what Zero Trust started from.
It's funny because I just was talking about how technically zero trust, the term, John I forget his last name. Leah usually knows those last names of people, but started and coined it while he was at Gardner, I believe. But what I was saying is for decades now, zero trust just has made sense to organizations or people like me and organizations like I've been in, especially the intelligence community, because everything operates off of the concept of zero trust, from a physical standpoint at the very least. Just because I can walk into the buildings at NSA doesn't mean I can go into any door, right? So I'm constantly being checked, both physically, through physical means like doors, manned traps, those sorts of things, but also through authentication methods of who are you supposed to be here, what caveats do you have, It is the way that it always was. You know, we hear the terms like trust but verify. I've hated all of those things. I've always been don't trust and verify has been my statement my entire career. I don't trust you until I do, and I'm going to verify as well. So it's never an option. But yeah, so that's kind of where, you know, it's always been burnt into my mind from the very beginning, son.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. So zero trust is often framed as a technology play. In your view, is it more about tools, culture, or leadership strategy?
Um, well, I think it's a blend, right? So I like to go back to when I was in the military. Believe it or not, I was actually working in the operating room. I was doing surgery back then as a surgical first assist. And one of the rules that we had there, it was a really simple rule, but it was also probably one of the most valuable and powerful rules I think that you could have, where anybody in the room, no matter what rank or what position you held, whether you be a technician, nurse, or a surgeon, you can stop at any point in time if you felt that something looked or felt unsafe. It didn't matter. That kind of culture right there saves lives. It's empowering people to act regardless of position. And with my background in the human risk element of cybersecurity, that relays back to, being able to challenge somebody in person. So a lot of times, who are you? Why are you coming in through the door? That type of thing. And so the zero trust, it really comes down to it being the same way. When it comes down to tools, you can buy all the best tools on the market, all the best in class stuff. But if leadership isn't really actively driving that effort, and if your culture is not empowered to follow the rules or follow the principle of never trust and always verify, then the tools aren't really going to deliver the value that they're supposed to. So just because you have them doesn't mean they're doing anything. And if you're not properly supported and using them correctly, they're just going to become expensive shelfware.
Yeah, I want to echo that concept as well about leadership strategy being the portion that really anchors everything down. Tools obviously can help and will make things easier. But at the end of the day, zero trust is not a light, like, hey, we're going to dip our toe into zero trust and see how it goes. It's a commitment, right? It's a mindset shift. And it really takes leadership, top down support to do it correctly. And at the end of the day, when you have tools that are constantly changing, you want to have processes in place, the policies in place, people who know how to check configurations and be empowered to, hey, this tool changed. We might need to replace it. The configurations in this tool changed. We're no longer following zero trust. If we leave the configurations the way they are, we may need to change some things here, but having those teams be supported to be able to look at things on a regular basis, have that cadence, have that support, that all stems from leadership.
Yeah. And if I could frame it real quickly, I find that we all seem to like money. We all love money. So if we think of this as a bank, a physical bank that we can go into, without zero trust, we get into the lobby and then we walk behind the counter and we pull out our money when we want to, or we walk into the vault. Well, there wouldn't even be a vault actually. We just walk into this area of the bank that has a big pile of money, and we grab what we need and then we leave. That would be a very awkward bank. I think all of us could agree. And as we start layering in defense to protect what is important there, we still have to design something that allows people, everyone to walk in. Um, the lobby, right? And then from there, we give the bank tellers tools, we give the security team tools, we give the bank itself tools to protect the money. We create safes, we create emergency buttons, we give security guards access to video cameras that show a ton of coverage. These are layers of that are the concept of zero trust, that just because you got into the lobby doesn't mean I let you behind the counter. Who are you? Let me see a badge. Just because you've got behind the counter doesn't mean I let you get into the vault. Let me see your manager key. Let's see some other physical thing. And when you're in the vault, maybe you need 6 or 7 other verifications to allow you to get deeper and deeper. that makes a lot of sense to a lot of people, but they'll design a network the exact opposite, where they have a perimeter, a firewall, and that's it. So as soon as you get past that firewall, it's a flat network. You'll hear terms like flat network, which means that because I got in, I now have access to billing, and I now have access to executive drives, and I now have access to all these things that don't make sense for someone to have access to just because they got through a firewall. So,
So with what you all are saying, it sounds like, um, when you're thinking about leadership, when it comes to trust, do they think that it'll slow down their operations? And what strategies can help balance security with its usability?
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that concern a lot when we talk about zero trust. That folks, a lot of times leadership, they're like, it's going to slow us down, especially in the healthcare industry, and that's really where speed matters, in healthcare. But again, I'll go back to my medical days, my surgical days. If you think about the surgical checklist that we had before every operation, in the middle of every operation, at the end, we were always running safety checklists, counting sponges, counting instruments, doing all that. And it didn't slow anything down. It made things a lot easier because at the end of the surgery, we're not looking for a needle that's lost somewhere or an instrument that's, maybe in somebody's bowel. We knew where things were. So it actually sped things up. And when you take a look at that from a zero trust aspect, you think about it as zero trust is mostly invisible, and it's really only adding extra steps when risk is high. And when it's done right, it's helping those people move faster because they're not tripping over clunky security processes that have been just kind of put into place and not really thought about to the finality of.
And that's where good leadership support can really help, because it's not just applying a tool into the environment and saying this is zero trust. It's actually thinking about how everything connects together and how the usability is, for the people that are, your first line out there using the end user. And as Jay said, making security invisible, making the processes so that they can do their job as much as they need to do without security holding them back, but also not just letting everybody in places that they don't belong.
yeah, great process and great workflow is what decides speed. And if you have great workflow through and with your security tools, doesn't matter that they're there. Jay, I've never heard you use that analogy, and it's a great one. Because it's one of those things where I know if I think the term is under the knife. I wouldn't want objects left in me, so it's comforting to know that those things are being handled. And it's the same way with security. When we are working with companies that have a product that's out there, they've got to start thinking about what a client would want. It would be comfortable to know that if I give you my data, that data has been thought of how it traverses your network, who has access to it, how you protect the things that I send you. It's not the same as something being in my body, but it all works and operates the same though.
But piggybacking off what Jay said, my business partner recently went in for a procedure. And me being a nurse also, Jay, in the OR, being in there, they gave her a block on her leg, did not label which leg it was that she was supposed to have surgery on. The doctor they hadn't even seen the doctor.
Oh,
They went completely out of order. And if you all hear that, I'm sorry, it's thundering and lightning here. It just started. So that's the background noise. But they went completely out of order. First off, you're supposed to wait until you lay eyes on that physician. The physician is supposed to ask you if you have any questions. Then anesthesia is supposed to come in, get the consent, and then do the block. They went completely out of order. So
Yep.
they were calling. That's what you say. Zero trust.
absolutely.
That's funny.
Yeah, I
That-
really, like you say, that comes down to that never trusting but always verifying situation again, and that leads right into another thought that I just had, where along those lines, you never assume that it's the correct limb. You never assume that, you know, it's the correct patient. You never assume that instruments are sterile. You always verify that. And how do you verify that? By using that checklist. And that checklist is going to be patient, you know, patient comes in, you talk to them, as you said, you mark the limb, you mark, you know, you verify with the patient, with multiple people in the room, that you have the correct patient, that you have the correct limb. And then you look at the instrumentation, you know, you look at the packaging. Are there any holes on it? There's not any holes. Has it passed the steam or STERRAD type, you know, whatever it is, sterilization process? You know, have all the indicators and markers changed? If they have, well, now I've verified. I haven't trusted that this was all done correctly. I've now verified that it's been done correctly, and now we can move forward. And so it's about protecting the patient. And when it comes to zero trust, you know, we're talking about that in the same way. It's not about distrusting clinicians. It's really about protecting those patients and just verifying all their data, just like you said, having that process and following that process. And just recently, I mean, it really came to light just recently. There's a surgical center that I know of that they were hit by ransomware because a clinician had admin privileges and they had no idea that they had admin privileges. And they didn't want them. They didn't need them. They're like, I don't know why I even had them, but they were issued a system and they had those privileges and nothing was checked. The process wasn't completed correctly. And so just that single misaligned privilege gave the attackers the keys to the whole system they had. Zero trust can prevent and minimize that by ensuring that access is limited and it's contextual based and it's continuously verified, just like we're talking about verifying everything.
So I have a question, and it's a question that came through my LinkedIn when I was sending out messages. I just figure it's a good point before we move on to the other one. So the question was, or the statement was, and it was from, let me give credit, Elvis Moreland. He said zero trust authentication and zero trust architect are two different domains. Can we speak on that?
Yeah. So we can actually go right back to the bank, if you will. When you have authentication, that is, does this employee need to be here? Let me see a badge, show me some sort of identification. If you're a security guard, let me verify with the company you work with that you were sent over here the right way, or that you're the individual that was assigned to this bank today. That's all authentication, right? And it's a lot easier to start there because it is either something we physically can do or we can do with a simple check. Does this person know how to sign into something, right? Do they have some sort of authentication ability? And then you have, technically, usually you think about authorization as something different. So can they be in here, and then are they authorized to do the thing they're asking? But let's shift it over to architecture. Architecture becomes the next part. We still need the vaults. We still need the buttons underneath the counter. We still need this physical part to have all of this system work together. And that's a little bit more difficult. It's not that it's any different thought process, but it is a different way of doing it. So you can implement authentication right away. But when you start looking at a network, then now it does feel like tools that you're putting in there. It feels like the hardwares. It feels like micro segmentation and making sure that you don't have a flat network and you have a bunch of authentications across. It could be from more physical devices. It could be something that's monitoring. So something that's constantly pulling in and looking at the packets that travel across your network. This could be like the cameras in a bank, right? So there's a physical attributes are that architecture side, and then working with people and representations of people, avatars of people on networks is the authentication side.
Okay. So what are some of the common mistakes organizations make when they think they've implemented zero trust, but have not?
So I'm gonna
I know Leah's got a really good one for this.
well, and that's what I say. I was either gonna set her up, or do you want to just go right off, because you talk about this all the time?
Yeah, I can go right into the idea that one of the biggest mistakes that's made is that it's attacked as a tooling problem. In fact, if you look on LinkedIn right now, there's a conversation happening in the cybersecurity realm about, hey, have we failed with zero trust? Is zero trust failing? Do we need to stop doing it? And the conversation always comes back to tools. It's because zero trust is being pushed as tools are the answer. And it's not being looked at as a holistic implementation. And when people say, hey, we had zero trust and we still got breached, well, that's not really the case in 99% of the cases. It's they had a tool that was proclaiming to be, I'm a zero trust tool, configure this and it's all you'll need. But that holistic view of, top-down leadership involvement, how things are architected in addition to just the singular tool or the suite of tools that, that come in and claim to be the answer to everything, the singular band-aid to the whole problem. It's unrealistic. And I
That's
think
such
that
an important statement too that you just made. Like, and I almost want you to repeat it because it's the same thing. Like when attackers see something that say, "Hey, the software is unhackable," we're like, "Okay, hold my keyboard, maybe. Who knows?" And then we have also these things that say, "Hey, this is a zero trust network architecture tool or zero trust tool. This is, like you said, all you need." And so someone turns it on and then walks away and think that that's what's going to happen, or like now they have zero trust. It's so important that you say it that way, which was that there's so much more to do once you introduce these things. Just because I hand you a hammer and some wood doesn't mean you're going to make a house out of it, right? You've got a lot more work to do.
Yeah, it's I think it's the not truly understanding zero trust. Like hearing the word zero trust and saying, "Oh, I know what that means," and then just, for example, going, "Oh, well, we've turned on MFA, so now we're zero trust." You're not zero trust now. Like that, you've done one thing, one step. Yes, it's very important, but again, it's only one layer. Um, so to use a similar analogy that Jeremy loves to use, at that point, you've locked the front door, but you've left all the side doors and windows open. So, yes, you've done something, but there's more to do. You haven't completed it when you're talking about zero trust from that aspect.
Yeah, as an attacker, I'd stated when I started this, I'd said I've used zero trust for both good and bad my entire career. So when I was attacking, I looked where zero trust wasn't. How far do I have to get into a network before everything is trusted because I made it that far? Right? Just because I got past the firewall, maybe got into a server that has access where usually only domain admins have access. Now that I'm there, I can do anything. That allowed me to understand the weaknesses of that network or the weaknesses of the place I was attacking, both physical and whatever. Like when we would attack banks, everyone was all like, "Oh, you got into banks," and they thought that was more difficult than maybe some other networks. In reality, it becomes a lot easier because it's something physical you can see, and or when you're going over the wire or on the network, there are so little devices on site that protect banks. And so what happens is it just is watching where things happen that there's more trust given than there should be. Um, but yeah, so like I said, I spent most of my career looking for the gaps in zero trust and then both determining how good a network is, because even if I gathered your credentials and I logged into a server that I shouldn't have access to, I still can't get off the server. I can't move laterally, or there isn't enough applications on that server for me to find a weakness to escalate my privileges to move beyond that. Like that is because concepts of zero trust network architecture are being applied continuously throughout that network. But yeah, there's a lot more work to do, like Leah
Yeah,
said.
I think a good way to look at that is that it's not a single feature that you're checking off. It's, as we've all said here, it's a continuous process. You've got to make sure that you're continuously monitoring user and device behavior, and then regularly revalidating privileges, stuff like
Okay. So where does cultural or behavioral factors like social engineering or insider risk undermine zero trust strategies?
I'll start it, Jay, and I'll let you go because that's your specialty. But
Yes.
let's talk about. So I'll kind of tie everything in that Leah said and that Jay's about to say, which is when we put these tools in place, one way, let's say we do actually configure them well, and everything's configured as it's supposed to be, but we build in this trust of our employees, and we allow the employees to have bypasses to some of these tools that we put in place, right? We say, hey, customer's been complaining about X. I'm not really supposed to turn this thing back on for you, but I can put in my access code and do X or make that thing happen. And most people will be like, nah, we're good. Our employees never fall for things like that. And then they get introduced to someone like Jay. So go ahead, Jay.
Well, without giving away any secrets, I think, everybody knows that well, most people should know that the weakest part of any organization is going to be the human element, because we're the ones that are making those decisions. We're the ones that have choice. Your systems don't. They do exactly what you tell them to. So that's going to be your weakest link. But conversely, they're also your strongest. So, and that comes down to training. So if you're able to train your staff and make sure that they are verifying things, and like we talked about before, when it comes to physical access to a building, for example, if you're out there in the military, it was always you're out at the smoke pit and you're having your good time, and somebody just walks up and hangs out there and starts chatting with you, and then you start to walk in the building and they walk in behind you. Well, that's a restricted access door. Why is this person walking in behind you? Who are they? Sure, you had a great conversation with them, but why are you following me in? So having the ability to be able to challenge that person at that point in time, and then also not just challenge, but stick to it, to say, hey, what are you doing? Why are you following me? Oh, well, I was just going to come in and I just needed to talk to so-and-so. And so I just figured I'd come in with you. I left my badge at home. Not my problem. Go around front and go through the proper procedures instead of, oh, okay, well, that checks out. Come on in and follow me through. So, and that's what Jeremy's getting at with the systems is, somebody talks to you and says, hey, listen, it's a sense of urgency or whatever the case is. I really need to get this done. This has to happen now. Why can't we just do this? And can you do me a favor? And can you just bypass this, just this one time? I would never ask you to do it again. I need it because the CEO needs this, because the surgeon needs this for this patient that's coming up at 3:00 or whatever the case is. They may have specifics, whoever the social engineer is. And, again, so my strongest feeling on this, I really hate the term social engineering, because you're really not engineering any social interactions or social whatever. What you're doing is you're engineering an emotional experience for that person on the other end. And so it comes down to emotional engineering. And when you're doing that, the other person needs to make sure that they're checking their emotions and saying, wait a second, I feel really excited right now. And like, I have to do something. Why? What has happened? What has this person triggered in me emotionally to make me want to bypass all the rules and everything set in place? So zero trust comes to, if I've never met you, but well, even if I have met you, but if I've never met you before, I don't trust you. When it comes to my business or my personal stuff, just like, and I talk about training staff. I think I talked about it in the last webinar is, you should never expect any of your employees to care about your company as much as you care about your company. And that's just the way, it should be. But you should expect them to care about themselves and their family. So if you teach them how to protect themselves and how to protect their family, that's going to bleed over, no pun intended, in healthcare, over to your organization, and so they'll start just naturally doing those things to protect your organization, your company. So training them to take care of their family and the things that are precious to them is then going to help them to take care and protect the things that are precious to you, and that'd be your organization.
So with that said, Jay, how often should employees be trained, and what does that training look like?
If anybody had the correct answer for that, you'd be a gazillionaire. But I think really it comes down to, and people are probably going to hate this, but it should be daily training. And I'm not talking about you sit down at the computer and you're going through a video and you're watching something that you've seen 15 times and you know all the answers to. It's not effective. it should be daily training from, a manager or from, a coworker or whatever, where you guys are just you're talking to each other about situations. So your manager comes up and says, "Hey, quick thing. Let's say that this guy who has a really weird beard, and he's very scary looking, but he's the nicest person in the world. That's Jeremy over there. He comes up and he's trying to get into the door downstairs, and you have no idea who he is. What do you do? Well, your answer should be, I'm going to tell him to go to the front desk and check in, no matter what. Period. But what if he says that he really has to get in because he's got to come and talk to me? Well, then I can call you, verify that, and you can either come down and you can take responsibility for him, or I'm going to send him to the front desk. That's it. Those are the only options that you have. And so it should be just kind of daily chit chat, talk, and that kind of thing. Making sure that you're following policies. But it shouldn't be. I think one of the problems is everybody gets into, we have our annual cybersecurity training, and we're going to focus on social engineering. We're going to focus on, don't put this disk in my system. Don't put this USB in my system. What if I found the thing that says, company bonuses? I think it's a little old. It's a little overdone, and people just aren't really paying attention to it. So it needs to be more of a conversation and a daily conversation, and not focus on training.
Yeah, talk about things that people don't like. I'm the exact opposite. I don't think you need training at all. The whole idea is if you implement zero trust network architecture the right way, you don't trust the human anyway. And even if someone tries to say, hey, walk in right behind me, you have a door that doesn't allow a man, like you set up a man trap that doesn't allow, what is that even? Oh, tailgating. Doesn't allow tailgating. Now you've taken that choice away. Hey, I'd love to let you in, but we just implemented these new doors that as soon as I walk in, it only lets one person in at a time. So you're gonna have
Yeah,
to.
but I mean, there's ways around that. What if I piggyback on you? Like I
Like physically
literally
piggyback.
back.
Well, now I introduce a camera that's looking for who you are and how much you weighed when you left. As you not only a camera but like a pad on the ground. There's always a technical way. Trust me.
There is, but
You go to
there's
places like
always,
Oak Ridge, they had very interesting ways.
I
And
know,
that's
but
the
but
idea.
there's
The idea is it's
expenses that
our
come with it.
job
And
to
but if you
get
have a
past that.
smaller company, how do you do that? That's what I'm getting. I understand and I agree. It'd be great if we could all have the anti-tailgating doors with the cameras and the this and the that and the bug spray that enters into the room if somebody extra comes in that knocks just that person out because it's dedicated to their DNA. But how does a smaller company, a surgical center, how do they do that? And that's where I think you do need the training, and it needs to be a daily conversation. Yes, you have the zero trust, but you have to have that daily conversation about what zero trust means and what to do.
See, and I, as usual, stand right in the middle. I feel like you need both, right? So one of the elements of zero trust that isn't in the name, so we all get the zero trust part because it's right there hitting you in the face. We don't trust anything. But another element of zero trust is assumed breach. So implementing zero trust, you're always assuming, what if this was breached? We're going to assume it was breached. What would happen? And then how do we protect that? And when you have the human element, you, like Jay said, you have to assume a breach there because, people are people and people are going to people.
People are
When you assume that someone will click on a link, no matter how good your training is, you can stop maybe 96, 97% of the workforce from clicking on a link, but you have to assume that someone at some point is going to. So there's something additional that you should implement when you're doing zero trust. You assume that, right? You don't sit back and say, well, we've got our yearly training and we're good to go. Or, we've ramped up our training so that it's now monthly and so we're good to go. You still do that, but you also think about, and as Jeremy likes to say, the attacker mindset, right? You think about the assumed breach and what is the attacker looking for. And I would say in those smaller surgical centers, the smaller offices, looking at, and this is where the conversation comes in with leadership, right? Looking at what are the crown jewels of the company and where do we need to put those additional layers of security? So we assume someone clicks on a link. Where do we then, this is where the technology comes in. Where do we put the technology to keep the attackers from using that link to access deeper into the things that matter most, our patient data, our records, the financial data, those things that we've identified as a leadership level and then communicated with our team You know, those are the conversations that are the backbone of a successful zero trust implementation.
Mhm.
That was very well said, 'cause that's exactly right. Because I can sit and build a technology that's going to protect something, but like you always used to tell me, so what? Like, okay, you got in. Now what? Does the client even care that you got that data? Oh, I didn't even think of that. Right? And so it's identifying, being able to tell the stories each day, like Jay's saying, having scenarios that you put people in, and you put them in scenarios that show them what the values that that company has, or the things that are important to that company. The number one thing that stopped the gift card, hey, this is your CEO, I need you to go get gift cards for me. The number one thing that stopped that was the CEO saying to their employees, I will never call you or text you to tell you that I will do that thing. So if you get it, it wasn't me. That company no longer has to worry about that scenario. But yeah, it's just letting people talking about the things that you need to talk about, determining when there is a gap in people or people are breached, determining how do you add additional layers of security is that next step. And so it's a fantastic way of just prioritizing for if you're a smaller organization. But that's not what you should do even if you're a big organization and they still don't do it. But
So what's the toughest barrier to adoption, legacy technology, staff pushback, or lack of leadership buy-in?
is there an all the above? I didn't where was the all the above?
Yeah, I know. I mean, that one's really tough because really, like all three of those are just they're real. But I I feel like it's the leadership would be would edge everything out by just a little bit. I think that you have to have leadership buy-in and have leadership backing it and support in order for it to
And
really
empowering the team to do
and
it.
yes, and
Because
empowering.
the least is the legacy. I can say that pretty confidently. I've been in the worst environments ever. In fact, and I can talk about it now, at Department of Energy, there were times where there was like software running on a system that can only be run on that system that they tried to air gap, even though there isn't such thing. They tried to air gap far, far away, and they put tons of mitigating or compensating controls around it because they knew it was a problem, but they couldn't take it down. You couldn't get more legacy than some of the stuff that was there, but it was still fine. Like, yes, it was very bad to be in the environment, but there was a operational need for it to be there, and compensating controls was put in place to make sure that it didn't cause a problem that it shouldn't. And so legacy equipment to me is the lowest. You can get around that with smart engineering, with great team, but if you don't have the time to engineer it or aren't given the time to think about it or solve the problem, that's leadership not allowing you to do that,
Mm.
right? And actually, what was the middle one? Now I don't even know what the middle one was. Adoption?
Staff pushback.
Yeah, staff pushback. To me, that yeah, I think leadership. I think so. It did feel like it was all three, but now leadership has to be able to recognize if you have problems in your environment. You don't want me 15 years ago saying that no one should be on the cloud, get off the cloud. You want me today, and I'm literally meaning me, Jeremy, today, that is like, hey, you want to make a very bad decision, but let's make it happen if that's what innovation means to you. And let's protect your environment with that decision. So that starts with leadership empowering the team to identify, and leadership being able to identify when people are going to solve problems or just sit there in bad environments because it's easy.
Yeah,
So I believe everything on leaders now.
I think pushback is an interesting one because it happens anytime you implement something new. And with security we see it all the time, right? But it's the voices that get amplified that will steer the direction. And when you have strong leadership saying, I hear your concerns, and this is how we're addressing them, and this is what it's going to be, and this is how we're going to help you, you can turn that ship around pretty quickly. But when you have leadership, not saying anything or saying, I'm waffling back and forth, when you don't have that strong backing from leadership, then that one can get out of control.
Yeah, this is how we're addressing them is the key there. Great process and great workflows. When you understand how your team works, what makes them efficient, when you add a tool or take away a tool or do something new in their environment, it is the job of the person implementing that technology to understand how to make it fit into the workflow that makes sense for the users. Because otherwise, they aren't going to adopt it. We have seen this time and time again where we've introduced amazing tools into a space, and a few years later they're back to their bad habits and getting off of that amazing tool, and then wondering, well, now we need to do this, this, and this. And we look at them and go, you you had everything laid out for you. But what we failed to understand back then was we didn't understand the workflow or the reasons they weren't wanting to adopt, and we didn't make it easy for them. We didn't take away their pain. We solved an outcome, but we didn't understand how people got to that outcome. Again, people, Jay. You got to figure out people better.
What's their psychology, right?
Yeah.
So we know that a lot of healthcare systems are still running on a legacy environment.
Mhm.
What's the first realistic step to move towards a zero trust environment?
I think the first step's probably going to be visibility. You need to be able to know. You really can't operate safely if you don't know what's on the table. Like we go back to the operating room again. I'll bring up that probably that tired story of how we're always checking for sponges and instruments and making sure that everything's there. Also making sure that everything's sterile. Making sure you have the right patient, the right limb, as you said. If you don't know what's there, then you don't know what you're working with. If you don't have a good inventory of your systems and devices, you're not going to be able to lock down identity correctly, because you don't know where to lock that down. You don't know what devices need to be tracked. You don't know who's able to access what. So really, identity is going to become the new perimeter.
So with you mentioning identity, how does identity and access management serve as the core of the zero trust architect?
Uh, for me, it's the foundation of zero trust, because, like I was saying, it's really becoming the new perimeter. Traditional network boundaries, I don't know. I don't think they really exist anymore, because people and devices, they're connecting from everywhere. So especially in the remote / hybrid world, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
they're accessing things from many different locations, and every single access request needs to be validated on its own. So you're really gonna have to start enforcing strong authentication. And as we talked about before, applying that least privilege. Go ahead.
We've got to make sure that every time you say the correct authentication and authorization, it's
Yes.
very important that you pair those two together. A lot of people don't, because you're saying everything right. You have all these SaaS products that are scattered. You have all of these people that are scattered. So we got to authenticate and authorize these these individuals and these devices. Assume their breach, like Leah said. Don't trust them, but allow them to communicate. So this is where APIs come in. How we make sure that the business logic across all of these things makes sense and are communicating right. But yeah, like I don't think I've heard you say it that way, but before, but you're right. Everything has become scattered, and that you don't really therefore have a traditional, like, hey, everything's internal to my network. Like, even we have a scattered organization, but we draw this very crazy line around different products and harden them in a specific way, and we call it internal. But take me back 10, 15 years ago, it would not have been internal. It would have been very much external. And the
Yep.
only thing internal would have been the laptop sitting in front of me. And maybe the router that, allows my data to leave the network. But we're still drawing this line now and calling it our internal network because it's pushed out there. Interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting. So how can organizations align zero trust adoption with compliance frameworks like HIPAA, SOC 2, ISO 271, without it becoming just a checkbox exercise?
I know Leah are.
That's why I turned my camera off. I'm like, I'm not even here.
I think, yeah, Jeremy, we can drop. So go ahead. This is all you.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one because there is not a compliance out there that says you must implement zero trust.
Mm.
However, there are a lot of elements of different compliances that if you implement zero trust, you've covered, the foundation and more. So I think the key is not starting from the compliance, not saying, here's my checklist, I need to do this. Start from zero trust principles. And those other things, those other elements of your compliance will fall into place because you have access that's covered in your different compliances that you're facing. Zero trust addresses that. And if you implement zero trust principles in a robust and holistic way, then you're meeting those compliances. And then you can check those off. But the key is not to start with the compliance and say, hey, this is all we need to get to. Treat compliance as the baseline. But if you look at zero trust, it's above and beyond what's required from your compliance, but that's security, right? Security is above and beyond just the checkbox.
Yeah. When you talk about it, to me, when we have our conversations are so boring to other people. When you talk about it to me, I always picture in my mind what it goes on a tablecloth, right? And if you treat a tablecloth like the table is the thing you're protecting, and you throw a tablecloth on and it's like bunched up on the corner and it's also not covering one of the corners, you wouldn't walk away and be like, tablecloth on the table. You'd walk around and be like, are we protecting this table the way we should? And you'd spread out the tablecloth and you'd smooth everything out. And then if you're really picky like me, you'd make sure it was the same distance around the entire table. Like that becomes like if the compliance is you have to have a tablecloth on a table, like doing things the right way with zero trust network architecture or whatever is then having other policies and other standards that make sure it's exactly as you would want it, I guess, in your household. And we have to have a tablecloth that covers all four corners and the middle and also is even on the sides, right? So there's much more to just the descriptive natures of these compliances. And that's another thing. Can you touch on that, Leah, for me real quickly?
Yeah.
Because we always talk like when we talk to clients and people, it's always having them understand the difference between descriptive and prescriptive nature around compliances.
Yeah, so you have a few different lenses that compliances come through. Some compliances will say you need to do X, Y, and Z, and they'll lay it out that you need to have MFA enabled. And then you have compliances that say things like you need to give minimum necessary access to your users. Well, what does that mean? How do you implement that? And that's the difference. It's not saying exactly what to do. It's giving you the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law, right? So it's giving you kind of guidelines of what good security looks like. And it's up to you to apply that to your organization, and how your organization is designed and structured is going to influence how the technologies that you implement to meet that. If we look at HIPAA, so there's a requirement in HIPAA for unique user IDs for audit logging. Now there's different ways that you can implement that, but when you implement zero trust principles and you're assigning every user a unique ID, and you're able to trace and apply trace back actions so that you can say this user is the one who accessed this record at this time, then you're meeting that requirement in HIPAA. So HIPAA is not telling you which tools to implement. It's not telling you how to, configure things. But when you apply the zero trust principles, then you're meeting that requirement.
Yeah.
So if I'm a healthcare organization that's just starting out today, where should they focus for the biggest and earliest impact?
I think probably the biggest thing would be, I don't know. I think the biggest probably be identity segmentation and MFA. And the reason for that is those three things are going to cut a majority of risk again, not eliminate all risk, but cut a majority of risk. And so even if you still haven't fully rolled out a zero trust architecture, if you can focus on those three things first, that's going to help minimize where a breach can do the most damage to patient care and really patient trust. So focusing on identity where your compromised credentials, making sure that's all protected, using SSO, strong role-based access, and there's other MFA methods out there. And then I think, as Leah was talking about earlier, like really, really figuring out what your crown jewels are. Most likely the EHR system, any connected medical devices, because the last thing you want is a ventilator going down in the middle of patient care for some reason. And just figuring out what those are and then segmenting those off. So that way, if somebody does compromise a single device, they're not able to compromise everything. So I know a lot of systems have flat networks, which Jeremy was talking about before, and trying to maybe no longer have a flat network. But until that point, segmenting your stuff off would be a good idea. And then just, I don't know, third party access is the big one. I know that in healthcare, we had reps come in all the time, and I know I'd be walking the outer core of the operating room, and there'd be somebody I'd never seen before sitting next to one of our machines, and I'd be like, "Who are you, and what are you doing?" Like, "Oh, well, I'm here to do the whatever for this C arm." I'm like, "You weren't on the list. How are you here?" "Well, I had an opening in my. I really don't care if you had an opening in your schedule. Let's go back this out. There's no reason you should be touching my equipment in my operating room if I don't know who you are. Let's roll. Let's go take this outside." Not that way, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. So, but yeah, just locking down third party access. Make sure that people are doing the right things when it comes to that stuff.
Yeah.
So-
For my, oh, go ahead.
No, so okay, so just giving me I'm giving an analogy just to make it plain for me. So Jeremy brought up the house. So if I'm building a house, would you say that MFA is my foundation and then I build everything else around that?
I wouldn't say that.
Okay, I'm just asking.
No, that's a great way of looking at it. And that's kind of where I was gonna go. For me, if you're gonna build a house, you better have a blueprint in front of you, and therefore you should know everything you need to build that house before you get started. So asset inventory is how we translate that into an environment. Know everything that exists, both physical and software based, in your environment. Because then you can take and do things that, like Jay said, if for your software, does it even have the ability to turn on MFA? Do you even have SSO as an option? Is SCIM an option? Is Okta what are the ways of authenticating and authorizing users into your software systems? And then same thing with your hardware. What laptops do you have? How old are they? What are they all this are they all the same make and model? Can they be managed remotely? Understanding assets is the number one thing to do so that you can make decisions from there, which in the house analogy is the equivalent of having all of the equipment that you need in order to pour a foundation, in order to have the walls. The last thing you want is to be able to build everything and then go, we didn't think of siding and we didn't think of a roof. And that's going to take 6 months to get here, and just let it sit open to the elements, right? So the idea is, after you do asset inventory, from there we like to have an understanding of regulations and compliance requirements that you're going to have. Because now you have all these things. How deep do I have to get into backups? Do I have to keep my backups for 7 years because HIPAA tells me to? Or do I not have any regulations telling me what I should do? And so I just have to make a decision as leadership. And then why am I making that decision? So it becomes, what's in front of you? What do you have to make decisions on based on compliances and regulations that you're involved in? And then the stuff, what do I care about? If it says put a tablecloth on a table, do I just ball it up and put it on there and call it good? Or do I want to outline that it has to actually cover the table and be useful? Um, and then if I had to pick a third thing, I would jump right back on where Jay left off, which is third party. Because especially now, there aren't many organizations that are building companies and building processes by themselves. They're either relying on third-party software, third-party vendors, and there's some sort of awkward trust that we put and give to those organizations. I would not be the individual that could walk up to the person working on an arm, even though I'm someone that attacks organizations that way, where I've been in a janitor outfit walking someplace and had Jay call me while it was in the janitor's closet and almost get me caught. But the point is that even though I know that's an attack vector, I'm not the personality that's going to walk up to that individual and challenge them, where Jay is. And so that's where that understanding third party risk and that becomes the next important step in my mind.
I want to jump back into this house analogy because I feel a little left out there. um, for me, it's taking an inventory of your access and what access is needed and what privileges are needed. So you don't want to give a plumber your electrician tools just because they're working on the house. You don't want to give the carpenter your plumbing tools just because they're working on the house. We're all working on our organization. We're all working together, but do we really need access to the same things? A lot of times we overprivilege leadership.
Yep.
Does the CEO actually need access into patient records in the way that, somebody giving bedside care would? So having those conversations, taking an audit of those privileges and making sure that it fits the scenario, because in that area, in the gap between daily workflow and privileges is where attackers like to hit, right?
Yeah.
If, like the example that Jay gave, somebody had elevated privileges that they didn't know they had, they didn't need. So it was most likely not monitored in any way. That's where they like to get you.
That's where they like to get you. Yeah.
So with all of that said, what does success look like and how can leaders know their zero trust journey is paying off? Is there a return on investment?
Leah, you want to start there?
I mean, I feel like there definitely is. Quantifying success with zero trust, it's hard to look at the program as a whole and say, yep, we're successful with zero trust. But it's easy to apply different metrics to the pieces of it. And that's where you can start to build that picture for yourself of, when you do your audits of your access and your privileges, are those lining up with what we're expecting to see? What's the drift that we've had over the last quarter in these? So taking a look at those metrics, and I'd say success from that angle looks like, we've reduced things like orphaned accounts. We've reduced our time to address incidents. You're able then to have those more mature conversations. And yeah, that got Jeremy.
Yes, and that's my point. I always, my favorite thing when people are like, I don't feel like all the work we've put in the last year has made any difference. And I love having when we're in lawn engagements, I love having the conversations recorded from the very beginning where I say, hey, okay, now show me your documentation or show me X, or how do you onboard someone, or how do you offboard someone? And we start working through these workflows and we look for all the ways that someone like me would attack it. And then a year later, we have those exact same conversations, and I go to say my sentence, and the team we've been working with rattles off, this is how we onboard, this is how we do this. And you're just all like, they know their environment, they understand the gaps, they have measured that tablecloth 7 times, and they do it 8 times a day. And I know that didn't add up. That's on purpose. They're getting so much value out of their space because they understand what they're protecting, and they have a purpose and a drive towards protecting it. And it's so different when you just implement something and walk away from it and don't understand why or what decisions you're making. So conversation's an important one. I always can tell when someone's really worked on something that they have.
Well, it sounds like you're saying just be OCD when it comes to
I
architect.
guess it's how I was successful breaking into places. So I guess same thing for defending them.
So 5 years from now, will zero trust be standard practice in healthcare or still an advanced goal for a few?
Oh, it's always been there. It's just always, it's going to have a different name. It'll be called the peaked way of doing things.
Yes.
I
Well,
like how you added that in there.
yeah, I think if you look, like, if you take a look 5 years ago, MFA was, it was pretty optional in a lot of places. Now it's becoming mandatory. I think zero trust is starting to get noticed a lot more. Like Jeremy said, it's been there. It just hasn't really been utilized or implemented, the way it should be. I think in 5 years, um, zero trust is heading that way. I think that it's going to be a big deal, and it's going to be like MFA is now. Yeah, and if you're not using it, if you're not, if you don't have zero trust architecture, people are going to look at you as if you're reckless. Jeremy looks at you like you're reckless right now if you don't have it, no matter what. But that's just the way it is. I think, and so I think in 5 years, it is going to start becoming um, a lot more required.
Yeah, that's a really good point. 5 years ago, insurance companies wouldn't have said one thing about pen tests and
Yep.
paying people out. You just said something to me today that blew my mind because it was one of the first times I've heard it, which is this insurance company is not going to pay for this breach because they weren't doing pen tests this entire time, and
Mm.
they considered that something they should have been doing. Same thing with these sorts of things. Like you aren't doing these what we would consider basic hygiene of your environment and asking basic questions about how to protect your space. And because you're not doing that, and the more they have conversations with organizations that are doing that, and then they have to pay out people that aren't doing it, they're going to be like, no, we're not doing it anymore.
Yeah,
That's a pre-existing condition of not caring about your environment.
good job. I think you're onto something there, Jeremy, when you said it may not be called zero trust, because one thing our industry likes to do is take a concept, repackage it, and say that it's new. I think the elements of zero trust will be required, especially with, the high visibility breaches that have happened in healthcare as of late. There's a lot more scrutiny on the security of healthcare organizations, and I think it's just going to increase. The regulations are going to increase, um, and the requirements for the elements of zero trust are going to increase. It may not be called zero trust.
Okay, here's my bet. It's not going to be zero trust. It's going to be no trusty thing or people.
No,
Is that
no trusty.
no trusty thing or people? Yes.
So, so my last question. We know that everyone looks at the bottom line when it comes to leadership and the stakeholders. And a lot of them don't want to come to the table and know about this. But as the CIO or the CISO who comes to them, and I want to know if I invest and I do all of this, make sure I have everything, and we have implemented zero trust, or we're considering it. What is my return on investment?
I get, my counter to that is, what is your return on investment if you don't, like, you don't implement it, and you're worried about, um and you're not worried about people getting into your environment, and you're not worried about these things, and you're just wild westing it. Your return on investment is, you're most likely not gonna have an insurance company that covers you. You're eventually, and this is something Leah always says, is eventually you're not gonna have a business. And then,
Yeah.
to quote Jeremy, you're gonna end up being a hashtag in the news and not the one you want to be. So,
Yeah, I do
you
say that
know,
a lot.
The
I think,
reputation.
yeah, I think really it comes down to, what is the cost of not doing it? It's significantly higher than implementing it.
Well, it was $9.8 million per breach paid out last year, right? Isn't that what statistics stated? 9.8 million per breach.
That's why we charge 9.7 million for all services that we do. So your ROI is 100,000.
Yeah,
Period. End of story. Now,
exactly.
This has been fun again, and I thank you all. Um, if you had to take away one key from this conversation that you wanted to leave someone with, starting with Jay, because you're on my screen,
Oh boy.
please Go ahead and give one takeaway that you would want everyone to know based on this conversation.
I think a big takeaway from this, and this is going to be, when Leah talks, I listen, right? And I think one of the big things there is compliance. Compliance is the floor; it's not the ceiling. It's one of the things that she always, hits us with is compliance is the start. Then you have to keep going there. So just passing an audit doesn't mean that you're secure. You have to continually work on what you're doing. So it's not I've turned zero trust on. That's not how this works. Or I've implemented zero trust. It's a continual progressive thing that you need to be monitoring and implementing and readjusting.
Leah?
Yeah, I think the idea that tools aren't a strategy. If your strategy is I'm implementing this tool, you have an incomplete strategy. It really takes a holistic view of your environment. It takes conversations about what's important to you. Tools can be a portion of your strategy, but there needs to be a lot more that happens. And it needs to, I'm going to harp on leadership. It needs to come from top down because you can have a really driven workforce that wants change, but if they're not supported, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. For me, I constantly talk about how as security professionals, it is our job to live in the uncomfortable space where risk is being accepted by others and we have to protect that risk. So for me, zero trust works when security becomes invisible to the user, but impossible for the attacker. If you're stopping people like me because you're constantly asking yourself, where are we assuming trust or where are we not assuming breach? You're going to eventually make it impossible for an attacker to get to a point that matters to you. And even if they do take over something, you'll probably have a whole boardroom of Leahs going, so what? Right? We don't care about that part of it, so let them have it. But the parts that we do care about, were they protected? And we all want to be able to say, yes, no problems there.
Well, again, I want to say thank you all for attending. Thank you to our attendees. We did not have any questions. Jeremy, Jay, and Leah, thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful. Thank you all who will be watching later. If you all need anything or any assistance or having any problems with your cybersecurity infrastructure, if you don't have that house built properly and you're looking for the individuals to build that house full-time, interim, MSP, you can definitely reach out to Reassured Workforce Solutions. Our telephone number is 1-800-394-1250, or you can check out our website at www.reassuredsolutions.com. And we also have the wonderful Peak Solutions on, and you can definitely also reach out to them because they are of great value, and I'll let them provide their information.
You can find us at peaksolutions.com. You can get set up a meeting there with us, and we'd be more than happy to chat with you about building that foundation and the walls, including the roof.
Because we do not want the elements to get to it.
Well,
thank you all so much. This has been fun, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.